Commander Jake Morrison stood in front of the giant screen on his ship's bridge, watching a red warning light flash over and over again. The light meant trouble, big trouble. His ship, the UES Titan's Forge, was getting an emergency message from aliens who were scared out of their minds. The voice coming through the speakers was hard to understand. The computer was trying to translate alien words into English, but the creatures talking were so panicked that even the machine was having trouble keeping up. Morrison could make out bits and pieces. Research station under attack. Creatures made of fire. 17 fleets already destroyed. Morrison had been in space for 20 years, and he'd never heard aliens sound this terrified. The Galactic Council was known for staying calm, even when entire planets were in danger. But today, their voices were shaking. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez looked up from her control panel. She had been listening to radio chatter from across the galaxy all morning, and her face told Morrison everything he needed to know. "Commander, they're calling it a lost cause. The Council has officially given up on saving those people." She leaned back in her chair and shook her head. 3 different alien armies tried to get to that research station. The Valkyrie sent their biggest warships, those massive cruisers that can blow up moons. They didn't even get close before the heat melted them into scrap metal. Morrison walked closer to the main screen and studied the information scrolling past. The numbers were terrifying. The star that the research station was orbiting was dying, and it was putting out temperatures hot enough to turn solid metal into gas in seconds. Most spaceships in the galaxy would be destroyed just by getting near it. But Morrison smiled as he read those numbers. Other species saw impossible heat that meant certain death. Humans saw something different. They saw the kind of conditions their mining ships worked in every single day. For the past 50 years, human miners had been going to the hottest, most dangerous places in space to dig for rare metals and energy crystals. They had built ships that could fly right up to the surface of stars and keep working. What killed other aliens was just another day at work for human crews. The research station under attack had 43 alien scientists on board. They were peaceful creatures who spent their time studying stars and planets. They had never hurt anyone, and now they were trapped with monsters made of living fire hunting them down one by one. Morrison thought about his own crew. He had 38 men and women on his ship, and 12 more ships in his fleet. They were miners, not soldiers. They were supposed to be heading to the Andromeda sector to dig up titanium from dead planets. Instead, he was about to ask them to fly into hell itself. "Amy, get me a direct line to Admiral Thompson back on Earth," Morrison said. His voice was steady, but everyone on the bridge could tell he was making a big decision. "Tell him the 15th Deep Space Mining Fleet wants to volunteer for a rescue mission." The bridge went completely quiet. Every person stopped what they were doing and stared at their commander. They all knew what volunteering for a rescue mission meant when the target was next to a dying star. It meant they probably weren't coming home. But that was the thing about humans that other species never understood. When everyone else ran away from danger, humans had a habit of running straight toward it. Not because they were stupid or crazy, but because they couldn't stand the thought of leaving innocent people to die when they might be able to help. Morrison looked around at his crew. Some of them looked scared, others looked excited, but every single one of them was nodding their head. They were all thinking the same thing. If those alien scientists were going to be saved, it would have to be humans who did it. Because sometimes, the only way out of hell really is straight through it. The space around the dying star looked like a graveyard. Captain Lisa Hayes guided her ship, the Deep Six, through floating chunks of metal that used to be powerful alien warships. The pieces twisted and bent in ways that shouldn't be possible, melted by heat so intense it had turned solid steel into something that looked like twisted art. Hayes had been flying mining ships for 15 years, but she'd never seen destruction like this. The Valkyrie were known across the galaxy for building the toughest warships anyone had ever seen. Their cruisers could take direct hits from planet-killing weapons and keep fighting. But here, their mighty ships looked like candles that had been held too close to a fire. Her navigator, Tom Bradley, pointed at his screen. "Captain, I'm reading 12 human ships total. We've got 8 mining barges, 2 cargo haulers that someone slapped armor plating on, and 2 actual military ships." He paused and shook his head. "Command really thinks this ragtag bunch can succeed where entire alien fleets failed." Hayes looked out the front window at their fleet. Tom was right. They didn't look like much. The mining barges were big and clunky, built for durability rather than speed or looks. The cargo ships had been hastily converted with extra weapons and thicker hulls. Even there, 2 military escorts were older models that other species would consider outdated. But Hayes knew something the aliens didn't understand. Every single one of these ships had been built to work in conditions that would instantly kill most other vessels in the galaxy. Human miners didn't just work near stars. They worked inside stellar atmospheres, drilling for rare materials that could only be found in impossible heat and pressure. As they moved deeper into the system, Hayes spotted something that made her heart skip a beat. A small alien ship was floating dead in space, its hull barely holding together. The ship's design was elegant and graceful, typical Zephyrian construction. These were the people they'd come to save. "This is Captain Hayes of the Human Rescue Fleet," she announced over the radio. "We're here to get you out of here and take you somewhere safe." The response came through crackling with static and fear. The alien voice was hard to understand, speaking in broken English mixed with their own language. "Humans. No, no, you must turn around. The fire creatures hunt in groups. They eat heat energy from ships. Your vessels cannot survive the stars' outer layers." The alien continued, panic clear in their voice even through the translation. "We watched the Valkyrie fleet die. Ships that had fought in 100 wars, melted like ice cubes. The Thorgan battle group lasted only minutes. Please, save yourselves. There is no hope for us." Hayes looked over at Tom, and they both started grinning. The aliens were warning them about heat levels and stellar radiation that would kill their ships. But every day for the past decade, Hayes had flown the Deep Six into conditions exactly like this to mine rare crystals from star coronas. "Thanks for the warning, Zephyrian ship," Hayes replied, trying to keep the amusement out of her voice. "We appreciate the heads up. All human vessels, this is Fleet Command. Begin thermal hardening procedures. We're going in hot." Across the human fleet, mining ships started activating systems that other species thought were impossible. Heat shields, designed to work inside stars, began extending from ship hulls. Cooling systems that could keep a ship's crew alive while flying through a star's atmosphere hummed to life. Sensors that could see through stellar plasma started scanning for threats. The Zephyrian survivors watched in amazement as the human ships began moving toward the dying star instead of away from it. Their instruments showed heat levels that should have been instantly fatal. But the human vessels just kept flying deeper into the danger zone. What the aliens saw as a death sentence, humans saw as just another day at the office. For 50 years, human miners had been going places in space that other species considered completely impossible to survive. They'd learned to build ships that could work in the hearts of stars, on the surfaces of planets with crushing gravity, and in radiation fields that would cook most living things in seconds. The Deep Six and her sister ships weren't the prettiest vessels in the galaxy, and they weren't the fastest or most advanced, but they were tough in ways that alien engineers still couldn't figure out. They were built by a species that had learned to survive and work in conditions that would kill anyone else. As the human fleet moved toward the rescue site, Hayes couldn't help but smile. The aliens were about to learn something important about humans. When everyone else says something is impossible, that's usually when humans get interested in trying it. The Titan's forge pushed deeper into the stars, burning outer layers. and Commander Morrison watched the temperature readings on his screen climb higher and higher. The numbers would have terrified any other species in the galaxy. The heat outside was so intense, it could turn a normal spaceship into vapor in less than a second. But Morrison's ship kept flying forward, its mining-grade hull glowing but holding strong. Through the swirling clouds of superheated gas, Morrison finally saw what had destroyed so many alien fleets. They moved like giant snakes made of pure fire, each one as long as a city block and twice as wide as a subway train. The creatures swam through the stars, plasma like dolphins in water, their bodies crackling with energy that could melt mountains. "Commander, I count 37 of those things," called out Ben Carter from his radar station. "They're surrounding the research station like wolves around a campfire. Range is about 2,000 kilometers, and they're getting closer fast." Morrison leaned forward in his captain's chair, studying the alien research station on his main screen. It was a beautiful structure, built with the kind of elegant curves that Zephyrian architects were famous for. But now, it looked like a glass ornament hanging in a furnace, surrounded by predators that wanted to tear it apart. The fire creatures moved with a terrible intelligence. They weren't just wild animals attacking randomly. They were hunting as a team, taking turns striking at the station's shields while others circled around to cut off escape routes. Morrison had seen pack hunters before, but never anything like this. "Look at the size of those things," whispered Navigation Officer Danny Walsh. "Each one is bigger than our biggest mining barge, and they're made of the same stuff as the star itself." Morrison watched as one of the creatures opened what looked like a mouth and fired a beam of concentrated heat at the research station. The alien shields flickered and dimmed under the assault. The station's defenses were failing fast. "All ships, this is Morrison," the commander announced over the fleet radio. "Weapons free. We're going to give these heat-eating monsters more energy than they can stomach." The human fleet spread out in a formation they'd used thousands of times before when mining in dangerous asteroid fields. Each ship knew exactly where to position itself for maximum firepower, while staying out of each other's way. When the first mining laser fired, Morrison almost couldn't believe how effective it was. The beam, designed to slice through solid rock and metal asteroids, cut right through one of the fire serpents like a hot knife through butter. The creature writhed in apparent pain before dissolving back into the star's plasma. "Direct hit," shouted Weapons Officer Kelly Brooks from the Asterisk Deep. 6 Asterisk. "These mining lasers are tearing them apart." Across the human fleet, more laser beams began firing. The aliens had tried to fight these creatures with traditional weapons, designed for ship-to-ship combat. But humans were using industrial equipment built to cut through the toughest materials in space. The difference was like trying to fight a tiger with a fly swatter versus using a chainsaw. The fire serpents quickly realized they were facing something new and dangerous. They began focusing their attacks on the human ships, firing concentrated beams of heat that could have melted any other fleet in seconds. Captain Hayes felt her ship shake as one of the creatures scored a direct hit on the Deep Six. Alarms started screaming, and her hull temperature indicators turned bright red. "Hull integrity down to 60%, she called out. "But our cooling systems are holding steady." Her crew kept working even as their ship glowed like a piece of hot metal fresh from a forge. The hull was designed to handle exactly this kind of punishment. Human miners had learned long ago that the most valuable materials in space were always found in the most dangerous places. Another serpent struck the Deep Six with a thermal lance that would have instantly vaporized a Valkyrie cruiser. The human ship's armor absorbed the hit and kept fighting. Hayes smiled grimly as her weapons officer reported another successful kill. This was what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. While other civilizations built their ships to avoid danger, humans built theirs to dive headfirst into hell and keep working. They'd spent decades learning to mine in stellar coronas, on planets with crushing gravity, and in radiation fields that would kill most living things. The fire serpents were learning a hard lesson. When you've evolved to hunt prey that runs away from heat, you're in trouble when you meet predators who consider a star's corona to be a comfortable working environment. The battle had been going on for 3 hours, and the space around the research station looked like a war zone. Explosions lit up the star's corona as human ships fought creatures made of living fire. Chief Engineer Mike Davis was working frantically in the engine room of the Titan's forge, sweat dripping down his face as he rewired mining equipment into weapons of war. Davis had spent his whole career building machines to dig holes in asteroids and extract valuable metals from dead planets. Now he was turning those same tools into certain kilos. He'd taken the explosive charges they normally use to blast apart rock formations and rigged them with proximity sensors. When the charges detected one of the fire creatures nearby, they would explode and send shockwaves through the plasma that could tear the serpents apart. Davis, I need those heat-seeking missiles ready in 30 seconds. Commander Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom, barely audible over the sound of alarms and weapons fire. Almost got it, Commander, Davis shouted back, his hands flying over the control panels. These mining missiles were built to track heat signatures in asteroids, not chase living targets. But I've rewired the guidance systems. They should lock onto those serpents now. The ship shook violently as another fire creature slammed into their hull. Davis grabbed onto a support beam to keep from falling as the lights flickered, but the ship's armor held strong. Human mining vessels were built to survive collisions with asteroids, solar flares, and equipment failures in the middle of space. A few angry serpents weren't going to stop them outside. The human fleet was fighting like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Hayes was using her mining ship like a battering ram, charging straight at the fire creatures and hitting them with point-blank laser strikes. Other ships were coordinating their movements to create crossfire patterns that trapped the serpents between multiple laser beams. The aliens watching from their damaged ships couldn't believe what they were seeing. Human tactics would have been considered insane by any military academy in the galaxy. They were using controlled explosions that turned the star's own plasma into a weapon. They were ramming their ships into creatures twice their size. They were fighting a battle inside a dying star, like it was just another day at work. Lieutenant Rachel Miller was monitoring communications from the Zephyrian research station when she noticed something strange. "Commander, I'm picking up some interesting chatter from the survivors," she called out. "They're saying the creatures aren't just attacking randomly." Morrison looked up from his tactical display. "What do you mean?" According to these attacks started when their deep space probe detected something moving in the star's core layers. The serpents seemed to be protecting something deeper in the corona. Every time our ships try to move toward the star's center, more of them show up. Morrison studied the battle pattern on his screens. Miller was right. The fire creatures were most aggressive when human ships moved toward the star's inner layers. They were acting like guard dogs protecting something valuable. "All ships, this is Morrison," he announced over the fleet radio. "Change of plans. We're not just here to rescue the research station anymore. There's something these serpents are guarding in the star's core, and I want to know what it is." Captain Hayes' voice came back immediately. "Commander, you're talking about flying deeper into a dying star. Even our ships have limits." Morrison looked at the temperature readings on his screen. They were already operating in conditions that would kill any other species instantly. Going deeper would push even human engineering to its breaking point. But that had never stopped humans before. "Hayes, how many times have you told me that the best mining is always found in the most dangerous places?" Morrison asked with a grim smile. There was a pause. Then Hayes laughed. "Fair point, Commander. Deep Six is ready for core insertion." One by one, the other ship captains confirmed they were ready to dive deeper into hell. Davis finished his modifications to the heat-seeking missiles just as the fleet began moving toward the star's core layers. The fire serpents immediately became more aggressive, throwing themselves at the human ships with desperate fury. But humans had been mining in impossible conditions for decades. They'd learned to work in places where other species saw only death. The star's core held secrets that the serpents were willing to die to protect, and humans were about to find out what those secrets were, even if it meant flying where no other species in the galaxy would dare to go. The fleet dove deeper into the dying star, their hulls glowing white-hot, but still holding strong. Whatever was waiting for them in the core, they would face it head-on, because that's what humans did when everyone else said something was impossible. When the human fleet reached the star's core boundary, they found something that defied imagination. Navigator Jenny Foster stared at her instruments, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Commander," she whispered, "that thing is the size of a small moon." The creature floating in the star's heart was beyond anything in human experience. It looked like a living galaxy made of fire and lightning, with tentacles that stretched for thousands of miles through the stellar plasma. Beautiful patterns of energy flowed across its surface like aurora displays. But there was something terrifying about its alien intelligence. Commander Morrison watched his tactical screen as the readings came in. The creature wasn't just living inside the dying star. It was feeding on the star's death energy, growing stronger as the star collapsed. Worse yet, every few minutes, it would spawn another fire serpent, sending the newborn creature out to hunt and protect its parent. "It's accelerating the star's collapse," reported Science Officer Patricia Walsh, horror clear in her voice. "At this rate, the star will go supernova in less than 6 hours. The explosion will destroy everything in this solar system and damage planets 3 systems away." Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't just about saving 43 Zephyrian researchers anymore. If that creature kept feeding, billions of people across multiple star systems would die when the supernova hit their worlds. "All ships, prepare every mining charge we have for simultaneous detonation," Morrison announced over the fleet radio. "We're going to blow this thing's feeding tubes and force it to go deeper into the star, where it can't accelerate the collapse." There was silence on the radio for a long moment. Then Captain Hayes's voice crackled through. "Jake, those mining charges will need to be detonated at point-blank range to be effective against something that size. Half our fleet won't survive the explosion." Morrison closed his eyes for a moment. He'd known this moment would come eventually. Every deep space miner did. Sooner or later, you'd find yourself in a situation where the only way to save others was to risk everything yourself. "I know, Lisa," he said quietly, "but it's the only way to stop this thing." The human ships moved into position around the creature's feeding tentacles. Chief Engineer Davis had spent the last hour connecting every explosive charge from every ship into one massive bomb. It was enough firepower to blow apart a small asteroid, all focused on disrupting the creature's connection to the star's energy. The creature seemed to sense what they were planning. More fire serpents began emerging from its body, rushing toward the human ships with desperate fury. But the human fleet held their formation, their mining lasers cutting down any serpent that got too close. Morrison looked around his bridge at his crew. These weren't soldiers trained for heroic sacrifices. They were miners, engineers, and cargo haulers who had volunteered to fly into hell to save people they'd never met. Every one of them knew they probably weren't going home. "For the Morrison said into his radio, his voice steady, despite the fear in his heart. "For everyone who can't fight in hell themselves. All ships, detonate charges." The explosion that followed was like watching a new star being born. The mining charges went off all at once, sending shockwaves through the stellar plasma that could be felt across the entire star system. The massive creature writhed in apparent pain, its feeding tentacles severed by the blast. When the light faded and the plasma cleared. Morrison saw that their desperate plan had worked. The creature was retreating deeper into the star's core, pulling its remaining serpent children with it. The star's collapse had stabilized. It would still die eventually, but slowly and naturally, over millions of years, instead of exploding in hours. But the victory had come at a terrible price. Of the 12 human ships that had entered the system, only 4 were still functional enough to fly home. The Deep Six was gone, along with Captain Hayes and her crew. The mining barge Rock Crusher had been vaporized in the explosion. 6 other ships were so badly damaged, their crews had to be evacuated. 3 days later, the 4 surviving ships limped back to human space, carrying the rescued Zephyrian researchers and the bodies of 34 human heroes who had died saving strangers. The Galactic Council watched the battle recordings in complete silence. For the first time, they understood what humans meant when they called themselves Deathworlders. It wasn't because Earth was more dangerous than other planets. It was because humans were the kind of species that would volunteer to fly into a dying star to save people they'd never met. The motto painted on every surviving human ship said everything about their species. When everyone else runs from hell, we volunteer for the overtime. The rescue mission was over, but across the galaxy, other species were starting to realize that humanity was unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Here was a species that built their ships to work in conditions that would kill anyone else, and used those ships to save lives instead of conquer worlds. The humans had proven something important, that sometimes the only way to beat hell is to be tougher than hell itself.